Welcome into Purple Daily. Sans Phil Mackey. It's Zolgad and Declan Goff. And of course, before we start this episode of Purple Daily, we ask you to please give us a 5-star rating and a positive review on Apple if that's where you happen to listen to us. It helps spread the word about our show to other Minnesota sports fans. Or you can, or I guess I could say, Declan Goff, subscribe to our Score North YouTube channel, youtube.com/Score North, where we crank out daily Vikings content as part of Purple Daily. And on this Friday episode, Declan Goff, we're going to go back to our Reddit thread.
Oh, yeah.
I believe that you have an alternate reality question for us that we are going to address. So why don't you set us up with that question?
So many significant sporting events in Minnesota's history. Some have made us ask the question, what if? Like, what if Stephon Marbury hadn't left the Wolves? What if Gary Anderson had made that kick?
Do you think Gary Anderson will make this field goal? The answer is probably yes.
I'm sorry, Vikings fans.
What if there is no Minneapolis Miracle?
Steps into it. Pass is up for grabs and picked off by Marcus Williams.
Yes. It's time to ask what if in Mackey, Judd, and Rami's alternate reality.
All right, Mr. Zolgan.
Vikings win the Super Bowl.
Yes.
Alternate reality. We had a fun conversation on Dante Culpepper and Teddy a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And this alternate reality, though, this coming from the Vikings SKOL Reddit account. Alternate reality. What if the Vikings never trade for Sam Bradford in 2016?
Now, this is an interesting one because, of course, they were, in their minds, and I think they're right, were forced to make the trade after Teddy Bridgewater broke his leg at Winter Park during just before the season practice in 2016. If they don't trade for Sam Bradford, and in that trade, I believe they gave up, was it the 11th overall pick? It was a first-round pick that went to Philadelphia. And the deal landed them a guy who didn't start game one for them at quarterback, but started playing in week 2 and played and started 15 games that season. Here's the first thing I'll tell you. Alternate reality is they would have been rightfully completely ripped, because I remember getting to training camp in Mankato that year before, obviously, Teddy got hurt, Declan. And I wrote a column for ScoreNorth.com because I watched a practice and I said, you know what? And this was not thinking that Teddy was going to have his leg snapped. This was thinking, what if he gets hurt and misses, let's say, a month or something? Their backup is Shaun Hill. They are grossly under staffed, basically, on the depth chart if something happens to Teddy, because they don't have a quarterback who is, at that point, anything more than a quarterback's coach, basically. Yeah. Shaun Hill was an aging, God bless him, aging veteran in his second go-around with the Vikings. I think by that time he had stops in, San Francisco and Detroit, and had some starts. But Shaun Hill was in no way, shape, or form by 2016 a starting quarterback. He was there to sort of help with the transition that Teddy was going through, and that was going into Teddy's second full season as the starting quarterback for the Vikings. So all of those things being put together, when Teddy's leg breaks, and I said this at the time, and this would have been the alternate reality without that trade, how does Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer go into that locker room? That 2016 Vikings team was coming off a playoff appearance, was set up to be pretty good, and justify, okay, boys, we're going to war with Shaun Hill. So just from a starting point, and there's a lot of paths that we can go down from here, you would have had a real problem trying to explain to me how anyone could say, and Teddy's hurt now. That's too bad. He's done for the season. And at that point, you're thinking his career is probably done. And Shaun Hill is our starting quarterback. They would have been, and rightfully so, I think from their own players to the outside world, they would have been savaged.
Absolutely. You knew they had to address something, because there's no way in hell, like you said, they were just going to go in with veteran Shaun Hill. Could Shaun Hill guide them to a week 1 win or a emergency start and give them a fighting chance? Of course, we saw it in week 1. He actually played pretty admirably in that week 1 win over the Tennessee Titans in Tennessee to kick off the 2016 season. But you also knew, well, all right, we got to win. We started the season off well, but if we didn't trade for Sam, if we get 3 more wins, this will probably be a successful season for us. Or that would be more the realistic expectation. At best, I think Shaun Hill could have guided you to maybe 4 or 5 wins. And also, Shaun Hill wanted nothing to do with starting. Shaun Hill wanted that backup job to not have to play. I know when you're a backup quarterback or you're a backup position in any sport, you are always one play away. But Sean Hill wanted nothing to do with being a full-time starting quarterback. Of course he didn't. And I admire the Vikings for saying, well, man, before the Teddy injury, I mean, this team was ready to rock. We should be one of the best teams in the NFC. And if we don't address our quarterback position, we go from being, a favorite in the NFC with Teddy to being probably one of the bottom 10 teams in the league. And if you remember right, Judd, I believe some guys were circling around, like Michael Vick was thinking about coming back. I know Colin Kaepernick was someone fans were interested in, even though I don't think it was ever too realistic. Even forget who else was it. Mark Sanchez was someone else that the Vikings could have considered. Mm-hmm. So there was options, but Sam Bradford by far was your best option, and you had to make that trade. But let me go down this path for you. Let's say it was Sanchez or Michael Vick or even Sean Hill, and that's a 4-5 win Vikings team. Obviously, the 2017 NFL draft where the Vikings position, they had the 14th pick because they went 8-8 with Sam Bradford.
It was 14, okay.
But if they don't trade for Bradford and they roll with one of those bad options, I think the Vikings probably have a top 10 pick.
Yeah, the issue, though, is if you have, and they did, Bridgewater get hurt, and then your response is, we're going to ride with Sean Hill, which would have been ridiculous, but let's say that's the response. Or you do sign Mark Sanchez, who was just garbage by then.
Oh, yeah.
Does Rick Spielman survive that? Because the one, you know what? Sean Mannion might not be great, but Sean Mannion is an actual football player.
Yes.
Sean Hill, by that point in his life, was a pseudo coach. And Sean Hill plays week 1 at Tennessee. You win that game. And if you recall, the next Wednesday, when the Vikings returned to practice for their week 2 game in 2016, Sean Hill was on the injury report, and Sean Hill hadn't been hurt. It basically could have said age. and so what is Rick Spielman? How compromised does he become as far as his ability to do his job in ownership's mind if you do just basically tank? Because that would have been a good team tanking.
Yeah.
That showed when Teddy got hurt, it showed that you damn well better have a guy who's competent and can play quarterback and can function. I mean, Sean Hill was not that far from being basically me.
I know.
As the backup quarterback, obviously a much greater football mind, but the ability to actually play games was gone, not there. And so that's where, and nobody, to be clear again, even in the revisionist history of going back and retooling this, nobody could have seen Teddy's leg breaking like that. But, the fact was you didn't give yourself a chance if Teddy did get hurt to even compete, because Sean Hill, yes, he won in week 1, but could he have even played in week 2? So I think the downside of not making that trade with Philadelphia for Bradford is so much greater, because the perception of your coaching staff and for sure your GM from ownership was going to be and should have been very, very harsh if you didn't do something drastic. And, keep in mind, Bradford comes in, plays 15 games. Now he gets hurt at the outset of 2017, and that became a problem for him, not for Case Keenum and the Vikings. But all of those things being said, 2016 got off to a damn good start as well. And that sort of showed where that team was supposed to be at. So I don't see any upside as big as I am on tanking when tanking presents itself. This was one where it didn't present itself, and you really, really were sort of screwed there briefly unless you made that type of trade for Bradford.
Well, that's why, though, the alternate reality is fun, because if they didn't trade for Bradford and they go with, pick your bad backup quarterback, whoever it is, the Vikings get a top 10 pick. Judd, do you know who was in the top 10 in that NFL draft in 2017?
Run through it.
All right, I'm just going to go 1 through 10 really quick. Myles Garrett, Mitchell Trubisky, Solomon Thomas, Leonard Fournette, Corey Davis, Jamal Adams, Mike Williams. Now we get interesting, because at the 8th overall pick is, I think, where the Vikings would be if they had a backup quarterback. 8th overall, Christian McCaffrey.
Mm-hmm.
9th overall, John Ross, receiver for Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
10th overall, Patrick Mahomes. 11th overall, Marshawn Lattimore. 12th overall, Deshaun Watson. So it's so easy to be nitpicky. I get that. But in the alternate reality, if you would have went 5-11 and had a top 10 pick, and you could have had its chance at, let's just say, McCaffrey, Mahomes, Lattimore, or Watson, especially being Watson and Mahomes as the quarterbacks, being game-changing players and franchise-altering players, that could have gotten you one of the pick. Spielman is still making the pick.
No,
yes, he does.
I think he is in such bad shape because that's a good team that you had no intention of tanking, and the backup quarterback situation was so poorly handled going into training camp. I don't know he gets to make that pick.
All right, I think if
might have been better
if Spielman didn't trade for anyone and just rolled with Shaun Hill, and then Shaun Hill gets hurt and they sign, backup off the street, off the waiver wire. Yes, I can see where he gets. If I can see him taking some flack. But if he went out and traded a 5th round pick for Mark Sanchez or whatever the hell it was, and at least tried, and then the ownership of the Wilps said, well, you know what? This is a horrible circumstance, but Rick, we're not going to fire you. Like, your job security is based on Teddy Bridgewater's leg getting blown up, and you didn't know where Teddy was going to be. And if you had a chance to now take the next quarterback, and it presents itself to you, or even a cornerback, game-changing player like McCaffrey or Marcus Lattimore, I don't think Rick Spielman loses his job. I think that draft class determines his fate. And the Vikings didn't have a 1st-round pick in 2017 because they traded for Bradford. But if they would have been able to get Mahomes or Watson or Lattimore or McCaffrey, all of a sudden then Spielman is fine again.
You're missing one.
Who?
The guy they might have taken.
Who's that? I don't.
Mitch Trubisky.
Oh no, God, no.
Mitch Trubisky, Declan.
See, I don't want to even think. I didn't want to think about it.
You're going to go down that. You open the door. I got to walk through it. I got to walk through that. And the other thing too is Mahomes, who is a marvelous player. All right, marvelous player. I love the kid, but Mahomes has been handled so well by the Chiefs, so well. They sat him for a year, which the Vikings wouldn't have had. Now, I do think he could have been very successful, but my question is, how would the Vikings have tried to use Mahomes? Would they have used him? Now, because Kansas City's been brilliant. Like, they had a whole plan here. The Andy Reid thing could not have worked any better. It's been fantastic. But you got to go down that path, too. They could have taken Trubisky.
I guess I have to accept it since something named Christian Ponder happened in 2011. So I
you know
got to
what?
encourage
the
it.
The day that Spielman gets is both smart and gets some fortune on a draft pick quarterback will be the first time.
Right.
He took Ponder. Bridgewater, you could argue, was a fine pick. The issue with Teddy is I still think that was Norv. I still think Norv, and to a certain extent, Zimmer pulled the purse strings on the Bridgewater pick to trade back into the 1st round that year to take him. Was it 2014 at 32nd? Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting alternate reality that could have seen, if you take Mahomes or Deshaun Watson, you could be in great shape. But I can't put it past this team. You would have to be drinking purple Kool-Aid constantly to say, well, there's no way that they would screw up the pick and take Trubisky. Here's my other question from 2016 as well, though, because, that Bradford trade, as we just talked about, worked out for quite some time. You beat the Houston Texans on October 9th of 2016, 31-13 at home. Go into your bye week. You are undefeated, okay? 5-0. You come out of your bye week in week 7 on October 23rd, playing at the Link against the Philadelphia Eagles, and you lose 21-10, Declan Goff. And that's the game that afterwards, Mike Zimmer got up to the podium and talked about his offensive line. I believe it was being soft, which is akin to to me, that's the worst thing a football coach can say about his players. You could use every 4-letter word in the book against your players, and I don't think it's as bad as the 4-letter word soft. All right.
Okay. Yeah.
So what happens if that whole, because it's one loss, you're 5-1 at that point. All right. The wheels are not falling off. You're 5-1.
It's a road loss. It's a hard place to
play. Exactly. What happens if instead of going all in, and I don't exactly know why Mike did, but he did, he's like, yeah, what you just said, tough loss, too bad, we're 5-1, and he handles that right. Because if I'm not mistaken, that also came at the same time as around that bye week is when he had the stuffed animals, right? And there are different stories about what he might or didn't do, but the whole messaging was sort of odd. And then he melts down that they don't play well. What happens if Mike doesn't explode? And if Mike's like, we lost Teddy, it sucked, and we're 5-1. Let's just regroup. We're going to be fine.
Yeah.
Because they fell apart after that.
Well, and Judd, that set off a chain reaction of just honestly boneheaded comments by Mike Zimmer in 2016. And that was the first
3 more wins
many.
That entire season.
I know.
Dex,
they only went 3-8 the rest of the way. You started with that comment against the Eagles. I believe 2016 was the same year you said Anthony Barr, the tendency to coast. Was that also the same year?
Yeah, and that might have
And
been the
then
Sharif Floyd stuff came up.
Sharif Floyd came up.
That's right. No, I think you're right.
And the cornerbacks went rogue in week 16. Mike Zimmer's, for as much as I am, I think, a staunch defender of Mike Zimmer, I'll say it, being the best coach of my lifetime, and as Vikings coach in my lifetime.
Yep.
He handled 2016 horribly, and he had every right to kind of not botch it, but he had every right to be upset with the way things were going on with Teddy getting hurt and what happened, how your 2015 season ended. But if he doesn't make those comments and just stays your typical drone football coach comments after a game, yeah, I'm curious to see what happens. I mean, I do think that offensive line was absolutely depleted by that point. I mean, they tried everything they could. They brought Jake Long out of retirement to try to make it work.
And then he got hurt.
And TJ Clemmings had no business being a starting offensive lineman in the NFL yet. So
absolutely.
I think Zimmer, unfortunately, just derailed the morale was already low, right? Like going into the season.
Well, they got through the Teddy thing, and then they got hot.
Right.
And so you're in great shape.
That's my point. They get to 5-0, and everything's hunky-dory, and then you have a comment like that, and everything just went down the tube.
The offensive line was a mess, and there were problems. But you had won 5 games. And from
5-0,
and from
5 games,
there on out, you won 3 more games. And that team was not that bad. That team, I think if Zimmer handles that entire year, and I do think to his credit, he learned from what he did wrong.
Correct.
I think he's made corrections. I think now when things start to melt down, it's not that he's not still surly, but I don't think he's as prickly as he was back then. So I think he learned from that. But for that not to be a playoff team after being 5-0,
I know,
was, and in the alternate reality of that season, if they lose at Philadelphia and Mike's like, yeah, we didn't play well, it's too bad, but on to Chicago. I think that they are a playoff team for sure. And, keep in mind too, the Bradford acquisition for that year was a good trade. And I know it cost you a first round pick, but among Spielman, if we were to have a list of Spielman's good moves and bad moves, I still think the decision to immediately go and try and get a guy like Bradford was a good move.
Mm-hmm.
And so for that whole thing to derail was really, really too bad. Alternate reality, if they just continue to go about their business and they're 5-1 after the loss to the Eagles, I think it's a playoff team for sure. I think it probably wins about 10 games.
Yeah, I think they get a wild card spot and they're probably one and done.
Yeah,
I don't think they win a
but
game.
They should have been at the
a
very
playoff
least
team.
A wild card team.
I absolutely agree. It's one of the most interesting seasons in the world.
Do you think they take Mahomes or Watson?
I do.
I don't.
I do. Judd, they didn't know anything about Teddy. They never knew if Teddy was even going to walk again, play football again.
I think it's too risky.
Oh my God. It's definitely on the table. I won't dismiss it.
Oh, it's on the table for sure.
But I think,
but Mahomes fell. If Mahomes went, let's say 2 or 3.
And it's flipped.
And let's say then you think that in the alternate reality world he falls to them, then I think now we say they take him. But he fell so far for how good he's proven to be that I don't know the Vikings were forward thinking enough to stop that fall. I would hope the answer is yes and that you're right. I would hope that you're right. But I don't know that I can say that with confidence. If they had a decent history of identifying young quarterbacks, I would be completely with you and say, hell yeah. But they really don't.
I know.
They really don't. And I do think that we sell on the Teddy conversation, Dex. I think we sell Norv short. Norv's the one who came back from Teddy's college pro day, when he didn't throw without gloves, which I know is hilarious and we've joked about. But Norv's the one that said, let me go back to Miami and work him out personally. And then Norv's the one that came back and was like, okay, we've got something here.
Yeah.
Norv's, so would that have happened? I don't know.
It's a lot. It's a fun path. I love these alternate reality
conversations. And Norv quit after the Chicago game, right?
Yeah. Or, quit.
So does Norv quit? Does Norv still there?
Right. That's another conversation I want to know.
Norv. Yeah. I still want to know what happened with Norv.
I know. I agree.
All right. We done?
We're done.
Okay. Once again, appreciate you listening to Purple Daily. Please subscribe to the show on the YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/SKORNorth. Please also subscribe to the Mackey and Judd and the daily podcast feeds wherever you find podcasts. And if you could give us a 5-star rating and positive review on Apple, that helps spread the word about our show to other Minnesota sports fans. I'm Judd. He's Declan. Have a great holiday weekend.